We are going to be talking about Thursday being the new Friday and how you can create your own schedule and maximize your leisure time and work less while earning more. It all sounds incredible. And we have an exciting conversation on tap with Joe Sanok today. All right, we have a good crowd going. So I think maybe we'll dig right in. The agenda. So first, just some quick introductions. I'll just touch on what Spruce is for those of you who are new to us today. We will touch on what is practice of the practice and meeting Joe. We'll talk about schedules and goals and problem solution scenarios, along with a history of the work week, which is pretty fascinating. We'll also dive into discovering your inclinations, and then we'll take all kinds of questions. A couple of quick housekeeping items. Please feel free to ask your questions as we go. Joe will tackle them if they're relevant to the slide that we're on. And if not, we'll just save it to the end. We'll have a good 15 or 20 minutes at the end to start a good conversation. Also, this is going to be recorded. So if for any reason you need to drop off or you feel like you want to revisit some content, the link will be sent out shortly after we wrap, and you will have access to all this content again. So let's just get on going here. The next slide is just a quick, what is Spruce? And I know we have a lot of people who are new to Spruce on the call today. So Spruce, in a nutshell, is a healthcare communication platform, and it's really designed for all of you on the call today, and it makes it really easy to connect with both colleagues and your patients and clients. It's HIPAA compliant. It consolidates all of your channels, including a business phone line, fax, text, and telemedicine into one cloud-based solution. In fact, a lot of people like to call it their office in their pocket, which we think is kind of a fun way to succinctly wrap that up. So that's just a very high level, but if you're new to Spruce, that's helpful. And then I want to turn it over to Joe, and he's going to be able to intro himself far better than I will, and he's going to take it away. So thank you so much for being here, Joe. We're really excited to have you.
Harry, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to see how many clinicians we have hanging out with us. And, I'm trained as a psychologist here in Northern Michigan, and I sold my counseling practice in 2019, mental wellness counseling. And actually just today, I hired the person that bought that practice to be now a consultant with Practice of the Practice. We have 5 consultants that help people start, grow, and scale their private practices. I also do a lot of mental health advocacy and speaking. I'm a writer, wrote a book called Thursday is the New Friday. And I'm also a dad. I have 2 awesome daughters that are 8 and 12. We just love creating resources for people that are in the private practice space. And so we have all sorts of free resources that help people, whether it's our podcast or downloads. So if we want to get into some of that as well today, we can. But today we're talking about your schedule, maximizing your leisure time, working less. All of Thursday is the New Friday is about the changing nature of how we think about work. And so I want to know in the chat area, in the Q&A area, have you ever thought, why does my schedule have to be this way? So in the chat area, just put yes if you've ever thought that about your schedule. I know this week I've thought that about my schedule. So let's just glance in here and see some of the chat coming in. We see some yeses coming in. Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit. So stay engaged, get ready for some interactions. We're going to make this a productive discussion. Here are a few goals for what we're covering today. To understand how we got to this point in regards to how we view time, to go over a little bit of the history of it, to identify your 3 internal inclinations that research shows will help you get more done in a shorter period of time. We're going to reframe the week to tap into your natural neurosyncing through slowing down and killing it. And then we're going to create a new plan for your schedule to level up your outcomes. So how much do you work? Would love to have you put in the chat, how many hours a week do you think that you work? Go ahead and just drop in a number. Let's just see in that webinar chat there. I'm not sure if that's coming through, Carrie. It looks like it just says it's the host and panelist. Maybe.
Oh, you know what? I should have been clear about that. It's better if everybody uses the Q&A for both our polls and for questions. The chat is disabled.
Okay.
Thanks,
Great.
guys.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, we're seeing that come through. So let's talk about how we got here, where most people are doing 40 hours a week. First, let's talk about the problems. So in so many ways, the work week that we experience feels very normal to us. And if we don't know what's normal, if we don't know what's historical, we just accept how it's always been. And so we also need to know that without actually knowing how time was once configured, we're less likely to challenge the current system because we feel like, well, this is just how it is, a 40-hour work week, having a weekend. And problem number 3 is that we have an industrialist system in a post-industrialist world. And so feel free to put this in the Q&A section. And there's going to be a couple of questions here, so that might be a flood of Q&A. So you can also just say it in your head. I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say. I believe that staff, employees, and managers are more than just gears in a machine that makes money. So if we think about that, I would guess most of us probably say, yeah, I think that people are more than just something that makes money. I believe that people deserve to be challenged to grow, evolve, mature, and thrive within where they choose to do work. Like, yes or no? I mean, I think a lot of people would probably say yes. And I would rather have creative, innovative, and happy people around me than people who feel stuck in their positions. Now, believe it or not, those ways of us saying yes to that points to us being post-industrialists. In a lot of different ways, the industrialists would have answered that very differently. Now, the industrialist model is not dead. There's lots of things that happen. We're going to talk about what that industrialist model is. Of course, it's not dead. But when something first challenges us and creates a new model, it's important to its improvement or evolution on that previous model can really challenge us in different ways. This is what the industrialists did for us. In the 1800s, the average person was working 40 to 50 hours a week, 6 to 7 days a week. So they really had like a farmer's schedule. The way that they were scheduling things was terrible. And then we see some things change in the Industrial Revolution. But before we even get there, we have to understand where time comes from. So when I started writing Thursday as the New Friday, I thought, okay, so this 40-hour work week, this 5 days that we're supposed to be working, like how new is that? And then I kept working backwards and said, like there's some other parts of time that I just want to understand before I dig into this concept. And so if we think about days, those make sense. It's how long, it takes the Earth to spin. Months are loosely connected to the lunar cycle. And years, that's how long it takes us to go around the sun. But when we think about weeks actually don't make any sense. There's nothing in nature that says we need a 7-day week and we need 52 of those in a year. The Babylonians actually, they had a 7-day week because when they looked around, they saw the Earth and the sun, they saw the moon, they could see Mercury, they could see Venus, they could see Mars, and they could see Jupiter. So 7 bright things in the sky, and they said, let's have a 7-day week. The Romans had an 8-day week. The Egyptians had a 10-day week. Even as recent as the 1800s, the Russians tried out a 5-day week. And so in all these areas, even this thing that we experience all the time, a week, it feels universal. It was purely made up because the Babylonians just saw 7 bright things in the sky. We could just as easily have a 5-day week with 73 weeks in a year. That could just as easily be our calendar. There's nothing in nature that points to it. So when I started thinking about this and saying, wow, this thing that we all hold as just common of the week was just made up by humans and it stuck. So that typical week in the 1800s was 10 to 14 hour days, 6 to 7 days a week. I mean, that is a terrible schedule. But then in 1926, Henry Ford started the 40-hour work week. And so Henry Ford was saying, I want to sell more cars. I want Detroit to be Motor City. In fact, the first asphalt road is down in Detroit. And he actually advocated against railroads in Michigan because he wanted people to drive so much. But he wanted his own employees to buy more cars because he thought, if people are out on Friday, they don't have to come back until Monday. They aren't going to want to just hang out in Detroit. They're going to want to get places. And so he was selling cars to his own people. So that 40-hour work week, we think about 1926, less than 100 years ago. Okay, so we have the World War II generation is the first real generation to experience the 40-hour work week. Then we have the baby boomers as the first children that are born to 40-hour work week people. And then Gen Xers and millennials are only the third generation to experience this. And so this thing that feels very normal to us is actually very, very recent. And so when we start with that, we can start to say, well, like what happened as we see this start to shift? This gave us some really important things. It gave us a better schedule, it gave us recreation. None of us want to work 6 or 7 days a week, 10 to 14 hours a day. It gave us stronger neurosyncing with our natural sleep and our biochemistry, where it's matching our brain waves better than how other things were operating. And it gave us the weekend. It was a positive disruption, a positive evolution in the workplace, and things started to shift. We see that, in the 1980s, TGIF, or thank goodness it's Friday, starts to really pop up into pop culture. I don't know how many of you remember on Fridays in the 80s and 90s, like Full House and Steve Urkel and all of that. Fridays became this really epic day. It's the end of the week. I remember my father, who was a school psychologist, and my mom was a nurse. On Fridays, my dad would put on the Blues Brothers, and as kids, we'd all dance. It's the weekend. It became a day that, we're ready for the weekend. But over and over, we see that Fridays over the 80s and 90s and 2000s starts to become less and less of a productive work day. We see that it's when birthdays start being celebrated at work, baby showers, visioning days where we're going to, cast a vision. We're going to have casual Fridays. And then we see the pandemic come. And it really was the final nail in the coffin for Fridays being a productive day, a final nail in the coffin for the industrialist model, where we see that no longer is the key performance indicator for people to be seated in a chair, to be here for 40 hours. Now, lots of us that own our own businesses that are in private practice have moved away from this model well before the pandemic, that we were looking at how many clients we're seeing, we're looking at our finances, we're looking at the ROI on our time and our key performance indicators, all those things. But as a society, they weren't there in a lot of the small businesses. So as we start to examine this, we want to say, okay, as private practice owners, as clinicians, what do we do with this information? It's one thing to say, oh, great, like I know where the 40-hour work week came from, the changing nature of our schedules. Like, how do I actually apply this? How do I create my own schedule? How do I maximize my leisure? And how do I work less while earning more? So I'm just going to touch on some of the parts of Thursday is the new Friday. So we start internally with, what are your internal inclinations that are happening inside of you first? Like, what's your natural posture towards life? Then we look at how do we slow down so that we allow our body to prepare for the week rather than be in reaction to the week. And then how do we absolutely kill it after that? What are the skills that we need to get more done in a shorter period of time? So we're going to talk through all of that. We're going to dive into sprints, and then we're going to have a ton of Q&A. So the 3 internal inclinations that research shows that leaders have are curiosity, an outsider perspective, and the ability to move on it. So let's walk through each of those. So curiosity. So curious leaders often don't enter into projects or things with a pass-fail mentality. They're curious about what's going to happen. So say they do a large Google Ads campaign. They spend a bunch of money on it, and then they don't get the click-throughs they want. They don't get the people booking intakes. It doesn't work. They say, well, what did we learn from this? What did we understand from this? What did we learn our audience is not? And there's all sorts of research around the curiosity side of how you can develop this, even if it's not natural for you. Next, we have the outsider perspective. There was a research study that was done that had these groups of people, usually 8 to 10 people, and they would come in and the researcher would hold up the color blue or the color green in different shades. And then as a group, they would say, yeah, that's green. Yeah, that's blue. And they would be mostly accurate. There's a few colors that, maybe people's color blindness or things like that might interfere, and they might advocate in a different way. But for the most part, these groups, were about the same. Then they did a second version of the study where 2 people in the group were actually part of the research team. And they, for some of the more middle colors, would advocate for the opposite color of what they actually were. So if it was green, they'd be advocating for blue, or if it was blue, they'd be advocating for green. And they showed that statistically over and over, outsiders coming into a group have more power, more influence than they statistically should. I mean, you've probably experienced this if you think in your career, if, before you had a private practice or were doing that, or maybe you still have a full-time job or a part-time job. When you take one of those new jobs, how often do you go into a place and say, why do you do it this way? I remember I got a job at a community college once. And at that community college, what was happening is the way they were doing their filing, this would have been 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. So there were computers. They were handwriting their progress notes, and then they were filing them by the day that that person came in. So if I wanted to know, what counseling or academic advising sessions had this individual had, I couldn't just look it up by last name. It wasn't alphabetical. We had to go through a calendar and find all the times they came and then pull those notes from the day that they came, September of 2004. It was ridiculous. And so outsiders oftentimes can see things differently. So maintaining that outsider perspective is something that top leaders do internally. And then lastly is the ability to move on it, the natural inclination to move on it. And this is very hard oftentimes for people that are highly educated, with a master's or PhD, you've defended dissertations, all of this research that we've done to move on it before we're ready. But the business world is on a spectrum. On one side, we have speed, and on the other side, we have accuracy. And so most of the time, moving on something is going to allow us to try something, get some feedback on it, be able to adjust and change, and have models that engage audiences differently than if we try to do it perfect or accurate. Now, there are lots of times in life we want things accurate. If I have surgery, I want my doctor, I want her to focus on doing it accurate and well. There's times in our clinical work that you've got to nail it, you've got to do it right. But if we look at marketing, if we look at growing the practice, if we look at understanding where we're spending our time, more times than not, speed is going to be more powerful than the accuracy, so that we can iterate over time. So we do have a self-assessment that's usually $50, but you can do that for free over at joesanok.com/quiz. You can use that code TITNF for Thursday is the new Friday to access that quiz. This quiz, you're going to walk through these questions. It assesses your internal inclinations, and then it gives you feedback on which ones come naturally and which ones need some work. Now, it's not pass fail. It's not like if it's not an internal inclination, you shouldn't be leading. It's more like an Enneagram or figuring out your personality type, where you can then say, okay, I could grow in that area. I need to have some tools in that area. And then you'll get tips, in that area as well. So when you get your results from that, and maybe we can put that in the chat again. So that's joesanok.com/quiz and then TITNF to waive that $50 fee. You're going to get your results, and you're going to understand what comes naturally for you and what needs work. What's a habit already, and where are you taking action? Once you know what comes naturally to you, it's a lot easier to optimize your brain to do the things that we're talking about in today's webinar. So next, what happens in the brain when we slow down correctly? So there was a University of Illinois study that was looking at vigilance decrement. Vigilance decrement. So vigilance, how well we pay attention to something. Decrement meaning that it goes down over time. Vigilance decrement is based on the idea that we sort of have a glass of energy and attention in a day, and as we pour it out, it just slowly starts to disappear, and we need to reset at the end of the day through sleep and downtime, and there's not really a way to bounce back when you've lost that vigilance. So they wanted to look at this and study it and see if that was true. So what they did is they brought in college students. They gave them a random 4-digit number, say it was 4312. They put them at a computer, and they said, whenever 4312 comes up, hit this button. There's going to be other 4-digit numbers. If it's 4311, don't hit it. If it's 3321, don't hit it. Whatever number comes up, don't hit it unless it's 4312. So for an hour, these subjects sat there and hit this button, paying attention. The way they paid attention at the end of that time was worse than the beginning. They had vigilance decrement. So the way they paid attention at the end went down compared to the beginning. Now, the second part of the study, what they did is at the 1/3 mark, they gave them a 1-minute break. They said something like, we put you on the wrong computer, just hang out here in the lobby for a minute, and we'll get you back on the right computer. Or, they had the system pause. In some way, they got 1 minute. There were no screens, there were no magazines, there was no TV, just a 1-minute quick break to reset. came back, did the middle third, gave them another 1 minute break, and then did the last third. They found that those 2 1-minute breaks actually reset the brain so that vigilance decrement was completely eliminated. Now, as clinicians, this probably makes sense to us, where when you're disrupted, when you're taken out of your environment, you bounce back in a different way, and you're a little more hypervigilant, you're a little more paying attention. You have that vigilance because of our evolutionary nature of our brain. In new or different environments, or when there's a disruption, our brains pay attention to see if we're safe. So they found that even these micro breaks, without taking a 3-day weekend, these micro breaks can be extremely important. And we're going to talk a little bit about some other things that can help you get more done in the same period of time. So from that, we've put together this sprint structure, which you're going to get access to these slides as well. So a sprint is a 20-minute full tilt run. We're going to talk about your sprint types, similar to your personality types, in just a minute. But this is just something we use with our consulting clients to just say, hey, figure out what you need for this, sprint like crazy, and get things done. So let's talk about your sprint type. So your sprint type is similar to a personality type. Some people have done sprints. You may have heard it called batching. So say you want to write a whole bunch of blog posts for your website, so you can rank higher in social, in SEO. You want to provide extra content to the people coming to your website. You're like, I'm going to get this done. And then you do it and you're like, this did not work for me. This is so hard to get so much done. It could be that your sprint type was misaligned. So let's talk through what the research shows your sprint type to be. So first, it's what do we do and when do we do it? So a time block sprinter is someone that has one task during the specific time. So for example, I have the Practice podcast. We talk all about, the world of private practice from a business perspective. And so I may say, I'm going to get 3 episodes recorded in the next 2 hours. I'm going to sketch out the ideas. I'm going to get them recorded. I'm going to get my equipment all set up, and then I'm going to hit record, get it done, and just like nail through these 3 podcasts. So that would be a time block sprinter, where you do one task during a particular amount of time. A task switch sprinter, it's not multitasking, because we know that that's a myth, that people screw that up. They don't do well. You don't get more done. But a task switch sprinter is someone that needs variety. They maybe need to get a bunch of podcasts done, but they do half an hour of podcasts. Then they do half an hour of looking at your books. Then they do half an hour of podcasts. Then they do half an hour of blogging. And they have these high level things that they need to be working on for their business, but they do a variety of them. So thinking, well, do I need more variety, or do I need more focus on one particular area? So that's one part of finding your sprint type. The second part is, when do you do this? An automated sprinter is someone that they put these things directly into their calendar and put it on repeat. So for example, on the first Monday of every month, I'm going to look at my finances for my profit and loss for the previous month, and I'm just going to do that. So that would be an automated sprinter doing time block sprinting. Or the opposite or other side of an automated sprinter is an intensive sprinter. So intensive sprinters are people that they need to get away. So they may need to go get an Airbnb for a weekend, and they, during that 2 days, just go crazy working on their business. They get a lot done. You may have heard of how different people will do like Think Week, where they go away and they read books and get a whole lot done in an intensive. So figuring out which side of that you're on. So if we look at your use of time within the day and the use of time within the week, and looking at that time block plus automated sprinter, or time block plus intensive sprinter. So a time block plus automated sprinter is someone that has a very specific task, like writing, and they're going to do it during a very specific time. Whereas the time block and intensive, they're going to be doing one particular thing, and they're going to go away to do that. So it might be, I'm going to just go away for the weekend and get, this whole, Facebook ad campaign set up for my private practice. Whereas the task switch and automated is someone who's doing a variety of things, but they're having it set up to be on repeat. Whereas the task switch plus intensive sprinter is someone that's going away and just getting a whole lot done during that period of time. I remember, so each summer, we usually host this event called Slowdown School. So Slowdown School, people fly into Northern Michigan, we pick them up, and then we hang out on the beaches of Lake Michigan, and we go hiking. We spend a couple days just genuinely letting our brains rest. And then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning, we run full tilt towards their businesses. You can read more, watch the videos over at slowdownschool.com. But those days when we run full tilt, that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, these are all private practice owners, all people that want to get to that next level. And this guy, Michael, from Chicago, Michael Glavin, he has this awesome therapy practice. He has a model around helping marriages and helping relationships. And he'd been in this small group with me for a while where we had done this mastermind group. And he would come twice a month and say, you know, I want to work on this curriculum. I want to work on this book to train other therapists on how to do this. And he would often come and something would get in the way. And then he came to Slow Down School. And we'd walk through that sprint structure, and they would go do 20-minute sprints. And his first 20-minute sprint, he's like, I don't know what to do. And so he and I sat down and brainstormed during his sprint. So that sprint was about just planning his other sprints. And I said, you know, what if you just, in the next sprint, just tried to outline the main chapters of your book? Like, it doesn't have to be huge. It's just like, let's just get the chapters, maybe a couple bullet points. We'll just see where we're at. The next sprint, in 20 minutes, he outlined the entire book and had 3 to 5 bullet points under every single one of them. See, what often happens is when we slow down, when we allow the brain to just not be as maxed out, we can get a lot more done. And so in this situation, it was a matter of going hiking and being on the beach and skipping stones in the water and having really good food, getting away, and then saying, I'm going to run full tilt towards my business. So being able to slow down first helps prime the brain in ways that maybe we wouldn't normally do it. So I want to go through the first model that I talk about in the book also, and we're going to dig into a few other things, and then we're going to take some Q&As. So if you have questions, feel free to start dropping those into the Q&A, and we'll walk through those. We're probably going to have 15, 20 minutes to dive in. We can talk about what I've talked about here. Also, our business practice of the practice, we help people start, grow, and scale their private practices. So anything that has to do with private practice development, business development, if you're looking for free resources, happy to talk about any of that as well, no matter what your phase of practice is. So when we look at your business, some of the first questions we want to ask is, the F is fruit. So what is the low-hanging fruit? So often people are going after the shiny new thing. They're going after making an e-course or a podcast. There's nothing wrong with that. I love making e-courses and podcasts. But we want to look at what's already working and are we maximizing that? So if you have a private practice and you are full, maybe we need to add a clinician to your practice. You know, maybe they're a part-time 1099 or W-2 clinician, and they're going to just see 10 people a week. It may be that you have a group practice and that's continuing to grow and you want to go do the shiny new thing, but really you need to add a couple more clinicians to replace yourself so you don't have to be the only one that sees teens going through trauma. Next, we want to look at inflect. So to act as if. So when I was promoting Thursday as the new Friday, it was released in October. And then what I wanted to look at was, what do New York Times bestselling authors do in regards to their promotions? So most of them do at least 200 interviews in the 2 weeks, or I'm sorry, the 2 months leading up to the launch. They ask those interviews to all be dropped during the week of the launch, if possible. They typically have high-end media. They are in all sorts of different reviews and get a lot of attention around that. And they often drop into a flow state and have their kind of 5 to 10 main core stories that relate back to the book. So I knew I wanted to have a best-selling book. I knew I wanted to jump into it, but acting as if I was already a New York Times best-selling author, to go in and say, I'm going to do 200 podcast interviews. How do I get onto 200 podcasts? Well, I hired a podcast booking company to do that. I hired a marketing company to get me into a few different top publications. I acted as if I was already there, but then went through those steps. And so it may be, I want to be a group practice owner. Well, what do group practice owners do? How do they think? Who do they hang out with? How are they spending their time? Like if you want to work, say, 30 clinical hours a week, and you only have 10 clinical hours, work those full 30 hours. Put that time into the marketing, even if you aren't full yet. The R is reinvest. So making the business stronger. Oftentimes, kind of newer clinicians will pull all the profits out. And sometimes that's because they need all those profits. And you get to look at your business and decide what you need. But reinvesting is a great way to grow kind of the baseline operations of a business. So investing in a better quality website, investing in outsourcing things so you can just do the best use of your time, reinvesting to make sure that business continues to grow. Next, we want to look at specializing. When you think about having a niche, when you think about specializing, people will pay more for a specialization than they will for a generalization. As well, people will assume that a specialist can be a generalist, but they won't assume a generalist can be a specialist. So imagine I was really good at helping people with sleep disorders to get back to sleep as a clinician. People will probably assume I'm also good at helping people with anxiety or helping people with other areas. But if someone needs a sleep specialist, then they would come to the person that's the sleep specialist. So finding that way to stand out and micro niche in your community. And last, making it time limited, figuring out how you can pull in the amount of time you're working on things. So we know from Parkinson's law that work expands to the time given. In grad school, you remembered you had a paper due the next day and you knocked it out. It may not have been your best work, but you got it done. Same sort of thing of limiting the amount of time that we put into something. All right, we're going to take some time for questions and application. As those questions start to come in, I do want to talk about a few more things around really going into our brain and using our brain. So get those questions coming in and we will dig in. We're going to have quite a bit of time around that. One thing that we want to think through is how do we, when we are working, make sure that we use some of the emerging neuroscience. So one thing in particular is creating an environment around each task. So for example, whenever I'm doing presentations, I am standing in this, I have a corner standing desk. I have the same lights. I almost always wear this as my public speaking shirt. It's what I wore in my headshots. And so it gets me in that vibe. When I was writing the book, I had a different chair that I brought in here. I had different lights I brought in here. I had a playlist that I only listened to while I was writing. And I had a whole methodology of how I would make sure that in the morning, I didn't check the news. I didn't check my text. I didn't check my email. Nothing got in the way of my brain so that I could come in, look at my whiteboard, see my notes from the week before, and drop right back into that flow state. So the more that we can start to use this neuroscience, and there's a lot of other hacks and tips that we can talk about, the more that we can get more done in a shorter period of time. All right, let's see what questions are coming in and we can dig in wherever people want to. Welcome back, Carrie.
Yeah, hello. Well, that was incredible. Thank you for all that great content. I loved it. We got a great question in from Maureen, and she's asking, what would be your recommended approach to growing a business? For instance, when considering expanding into a group practice, would it be advisable to spend some time operating independently first?
That's a great question. So, in general, you want to understand your systems before you add other people to those systems. So I had a side gig counseling practice when I had my full-time job. And I then hired 1099s in Michigan. That's fine. You'll want to look in your own state to see if you have to have W-2s or 1099s. So I brought people in, while I still had my full-time job. I actually had a full office of 4 clinicians that were working for me while I was working at this community college. And that was actually the thing that I said, I'm making more per hour not working over at this counseling practice than I am at this community college full-time job. So just learning, some of your systems. But I would say if you are 50% full, that's a time to really evaluate adding clinicians to your practice, because they're going to bring in all sorts of things. They're going to bring in their own network, which is bigger than yours. It's going to multiply your network. When you shift from being known as a solo practice to a group practice, even if they're just seeing a couple of clients a week, that changes the image and the dynamic of your practice. Also, bringing that first person on helps you get those basic kind of infrastructure set up so that it's a lot easier to scale. Adding your first one's always hardest. Adding your second, third, fourth, 10th is a lot easier. We have a whole program called Group Practice Launch that I'm happy to share about, but that's something that helps you go from a solo practice to a group practice. It's a 6-month program we do that walks you through your first hire and getting all the infrastructure set up.
Awesome. Thank you. Liz is asking if you have any recommendations or changes that you would make to your sprinter types to be more neuro-affirming for folks with ADHD.
Yeah, so I would say this is for anyone, kind of no matter their kind of neuro diversity, in finding which of those work best for you. And so it may be, okay, I'm going to first take 20 minutes, and I'm going to just see how it goes. The big shift from industrialist to post-industrialist is industrialist said, this is the one way everyone should do it. Plug it in and you'll get this outcome. It's very machine oriented. Whereas I would say post-industrialist is very organic. It's here's the menu. Let's see what's on it. Let's see what works. And let's throw out the stuff that doesn't work. And so even saying for 20 minutes, if you were to set a timer and say, I'm going to work on structuring a blog post for 20 minutes, just observe what happens as someone with ADHD, and then say, okay, that really worked for me. That really didn't work for me. Now what can I do? Do I need to have a little more diversity in there? Do I need to have an 8-minute sprint, a 2-minute sprint? Like, where is your maximum level of attention for yourself? And then work on maybe bumping that up by 30 seconds each time. So I would say maybe just try that.
Love it. Great answer. Carolyn is asking if you can offer some suggestions on how she can get caught up with writing evaluations and progress notes and continue to grow her business. She feels like she's never going to get caught up and it's holding her back from marketing.
Yeah. So I think this is a great example of working in your business instead of on your business. So often we've just given ourselves a job instead of a business. And so if the business is dependent on you showing up, we want to try to see, where can we take those things off of your plate? Now, there's going to be things that you can't take off your plate, but it may be that you hire someone that is going to help with the typing side of it. It may be that you use AI in some way to do that. It may be that you have templates that are set up so that you have auto insert in some ways. Figuring out your process, which may take 3 or 4 hours to set up, but if that's going to then save you 10 or 20 hours, I would work on what's that process. Is there a way that you can create the same quality of evaluations and have it be not you that's maybe doing every aspect of it? So I would really look at, are there opportunities to outsource to a person, to a technology, to eliminate something, or to automate something?
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Shannon just asked a question. As a group practice owner, clinicians are feeling burnout with 20 clients a week. Do you have a recommendation on how to bring this approach into the group environment to reduce burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at what else is on their schedule. 20 clients a week, is a reasonable ask in any group practice, and to say that they're being burned out. One thing that we ask all of our staff, whether they're the consultants or they're the staff, and we have 10 staff in South Africa, is we have 3 questions we ask at least once a year. The first is, what are you doing now that you love doing, that you want to keep doing? And so that for these clinicians, it may be, who's the population you love working with that you absolutely want to keep working with? The second question is, what are you doing now that you hate and you hope to offload or stop doing in the next 6 months to a year? So there could be certain populations that just cause more stress for people. And it may be, I used to love divorcing couples, but now I can only have 1 on my caseload at a time. I used to be able to have 5. Okay, we want to support you in that. Then third, where are areas of creativity or training that you hope to be in the next 6 months to a year? You may find people that say, I love social media. I would just love to take on some social media projects at 25 or 35 bucks an hour for the practice. It's not obviously my clinical rate, but that would just help me feel a little bit more alive. And looking at other ways that you could provide assistance or virtual assistance to offload pretty much everything non-clinical. And so those 20 hours, like, of course we need them to do their progress notes or have some sort of automation around that, but really being able to say, like, are they going back and forth on scheduling? Are they going back and forth on the intakes? Are they going back and forth on the finances? Like, those are all opportunities that you could have some front desk person or a virtual assistant take care of all of that, or have a system take care of it and have that take that stress off of people. Because really, with 20 sessions a week, probably the total number of hours they should be working a week is 25 or so. If they're behind on their progress notes more than that, then that's a different kind of discussion of, you should be getting your progress notes done pretty darn quickly. There shouldn't be a whole lot beyond that. For 25 hours a week, I would focus on those automations within the business. The other side is, depending on if they're W-2 or 1099, you may want to offer some sort of ways to reduce some of that stress. It could be ways that you bring things into the workplace. It could be challenges around health or nutrition, but really, without knowing kind of all the details, I mean, that's where I would start.
Great answer. An anonymous attendee is asking, how do you best manage two totally different responsibilities you're balancing as you build your practice and expand into new domains? I'm building my practice, which is work that I love, while studying for my licensing exam, which makes me feel burned out and I seem to move slowly with.
Yeah, so anytime we have a business, there's usually what's already on our plate. And those are the things that we want to try to optimize and automate as much as possible. And usually those are the things that are actually providing us income and are that low-hanging fruit. And then we have things that are more gambles or guesses. So it could be, we're studying for a licensing exam. It could be that we're looking at starting a podcast or an e-course or something that's more of a gamble and not as sure as the other one. So first, I would say, look at the practice and see what you can automate as much as possible. So how do you make sure that you have as little stress as possible? It may be worth it to hire someone for 20 bucks an hour for a few hours a week to check your email, go through your voicemails, like just do some of those basic types of things, even texting clients back if it's non-clinical types of things. And then looking at your licensing exam, how much time do you need to feel successful with that? And I would evaluate your just natural neurosyncing. When do you feel most able to study? And so it may be from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., but you're not waking up at that time. It may be that you got to wait for your coffee to kick in and it's, 10:32 to 11:14, like figuring out those exact times that you're at your best for the studying. And then I would also look at rituals of slowing down. How do you set very firm boundaries for yourself around that time? Because what often happens is when you have a business and you have a licensing exam and all these different things, there's just always something to do. And so you always keep doing things and just say, like, what do I actually need to do here? I need to study 10 hours a week. I need to run this business, which is 40 hours a week. And so right now is a busy time of life. It's a chapter. But what boundaries can I put around that? How do I make sure I'm as efficient as possible and set some boundaries so that when I'm slowing down, I'm genuinely slowing down and allowing my brain to rest? And so that's a habit to get into, to not be always thinking about your business or about your responsibilities. It takes a lot of time.
Okay, great answer. Maureen is asking, what are the key metrics, milestones, or other indicators that a private practice should track to measure their performance and success?
Yeah, so when I do consulting, usually the two KPIs or key performance indicators that people start with, and this isn't the end all be all, is money and time. And so if we look at how much money do you want to have come into your practice that you take home? And then second, how much time are you putting into the practice? We can have a lot of the things that we're doing from a management side go into those two categories, because we can say, well, I want to have 10 sessions a week. Do you want 10 sessions a week, or do you want to make a certain amount of money? If those sessions were $10 a session, that's not the KPI. The KPI is the amount of money. So I would start there. Oftentimes we can then look at the amount we need to take home from the business, multiply it by a factor of 1.5 to account for taxes, expenses, if you just want a quick and dirty. And then we know the gross revenue that has to come in. And then we can divide that out by the number of weeks that we want to work in a year. And then that tells us how much per week needs to come in. And then we can either divide that by our actual session fees or by the number of sessions we want to work. And that'll tell us how much we need to be charging or how many sessions we need to do. So oftentimes people don't take the time to really dig into all those details to really understand what they need to do to get to their financial goals.
Okay. Good. Liz has, thank you for the inspiring talk. I agree. And she's also wondering if you have any recommendations for transitioning from private practice to expanding to alternative sources of income, coaching, consulting, teaching, working with meditation apps, without working more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'll have to work more. Not that you have to work more hours in the week, but you're going to have to optimize your clinical time if you want to make the same amount of money. So first, I would say we want to look at your private practice. If you're private pay, you should be raising your rates by $25 to $45 per session every time you're 60% full. So we'd want to make sure we're optimizing that money so that you're making the most that you can. Then from there, so we teach this in Audience Building Academy, which is one of our programs around how to grow those sorts of things you were talking about. The problem that usually happens is that those of us who are highly educated are great at creating programs, solutions, e-courses, podcasts. We can sit down and be like, wouldn't it be amazing if we did all this stuff and we'd have community and we'd have an e-course and we'd have live events. But we create the product before we ever have an audience for it. And so what we teach is you want to start with growing your audience before you ever build the product. I remember there were some people that were wanting some help with podcasts. And so we went through this way that we teach called the 3P solution, where you talk to your audience. And so first you need an audience, but once you have an audience, the 3P solution starts with what is the pain, what is the product, and what is the price? So, what is the pain? So these people are looking at growing a podcast. And we said, so how would you describe starting a podcast? Where are you stuck? So they're giving us their copy, their ideas of, I'm a clinician, I'm good at trauma, I want to start a podcast about trauma, I have no idea where to start, I don't know if I need show notes or a microphone. So they're just describing all of this pain. And then the second question was, if there was some product that then helped you with that pain, so you reflect back the pain, what would that look like? And we thought that they would want an e-course for like $500. Over and over, they're like, we would love for you to just do it. You have had a podcast since 2013. You have the whole team to do it. Can you just do the podcast for us? I want to just show up and do the interviews and do the questions. And I don't want to do any of the back end. Can your team do it? That wasn't even on my radar. So now my audience is telling me the product that they want. Then we got to the last question, and I'm thinking, it's all these therapists, they're cheapskates, they don't have a lot of money, they don't understand return on investment. I had all these like things about my audience that weren't true. And I said, how much would you pay if we took on a podcast and say did 26 podcasts, helped you launch it, you got coaching, all that, like, what would you pay for that? Over and over, they said somewhere between $18,000 and $30,000. So this range where it was like, holy cow. So we offered back to that group, for $20,000, we're going to be helping launch podcasts. We're only taking on 4. You just talked to me about this. And within 48 hours, we had sold 4 spots at $20K each. So what would have happened if I had guessed what my audience wanted? I would have missed out on a whole done for you product that we could basically launch overnight. I would have spent all this time and money on an e-course. So back to your question, to me, audience building is number one. And how I define that is having at least 500 people on an email list that are getting some sort of email course from you, that you're walking them through, here's the particular area that you're growing. We have a whole method for how you write that email course. Then after you have those 500 people doing some live events, doing things like these webinars, do people actually even come to your events? If they don't, and you have 2 people that come, even though you have 500 people on an email list, like that's a problem. You have a disengaged audience. Now, say you get 100 people to come off of your 500 person list, that's great. 20% are showing up. And then you sell some product on there or say, hey, I'd like to talk with you about a potential product, or you're testing it in some way and nobody buys. Okay, then in some way we missed the copy. So all along, we're then saving ourselves time by validating that product, by validating that idea, rather than putting all that time into e-courses. So back to your question, you want to optimize your private practice so you have that money coming in, then you want to build an audience, and then you want to create that product after that. And look at things that are scalable as well.
Excellent advice. Chantel is asking if there are any AI tools that you have found to be useful, and what ways can AI be used to enhance work efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. Yes, there are lots of tools that are out there. Really, you want to look at what is the function of what you're trying to do. So for example, our chief operations person right now is testing out an AI tool to write standard operating procedures for businesses. And so she's testing it for our business, but then if that works well, that could be something that, say, we offer in consulting, like, we'll use our AI tool to write your standard operating procedures. If you're just looking for content ideas, ChatGPT is a good starting point for a lot of people to just get ideas for whether it's blog posts or slides or overall content. There was just a research study that came out that said that ChatGPT can compete with the top 1% of most creative people. They did this, I forgot what scale they use, but it's a standard scale that's peer reviewed and all that looks at creativity. And so ChatGPT is a great starting point for most people. And then I would look at, what do you want to have done? So for example, we do podcast show notes. We now have podcast show notes transcribing our podcasts through AI instead of having a person go through and listen to it or just use some other functions. So you really want to get pretty specific on what you want to have the AI do, rather than just here's the one AI that's going to run your life.
Yeah, that's a really interesting stat about it being what one in that 1 percentile in terms of all the creative folks out there.
Yeah.
And I've even found in a marketing role that it's really augmented a lot of my writing, which is sort of frightening and fascinating at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have another question that just came in. For someone in private practice, is there a particular social media platform that you would recommend as the most effective for growing an audience? Any other insights, such as finding a niche, that you would recommend?
Yeah, so we have a whole free tutorial on that over at pillarsofpractice.com. So I'd say we have checklists, whether you're in a solo practice or you're in a group practice. So I'll just touch that a little bit, but feel free to go over to pillarsofpractice.com, where we have a ton of free resources there for you. We're doing webinars also twice a month on a variety of these topics that you'll just see that on practiceofthepractice.com. But in regards to social media, I'm a big believer just in general that your business should make your life better. You should enjoy life. It shouldn't be this big burden. And so if your business is getting in the way of your happiness, your family, your free time, like, of course it's work. Like, we have to work and show up, but also, like, we shouldn't do all these things that we just like hate doing. So I apply that to social media, where I look at what social media platforms do I enjoy being on? And you may say, no, there's none. I don't like any of them. Okay, well then maybe your goal is through blogging or email marketing or something else. But I would start with the one that you like the most, learn that really well, push yourself to do a social media sprint for, say, 2 weeks. So say it's Instagram. Try to do something on there every single day that's building your audience. So maybe you're going to do an Instagram reel every single day for 2 weeks to just see what happens. Doing some sort of experiment is a great way to really dive into a platform, really learn it, learn kind of the DNA of how people engage on it, follow people that you think are doing interesting things, and realize that social media is not always going to be the thing that drives traffic. You know, having good SEO, having good networking in your community, having good marketing, you know, those are all parts of it as well.
Great. There's a question from Wendy, and it actually came in earlier in your deck. And she's wondering what the work week was like before 1926.
Yeah, so that's where the 10 to 14 hour days, 6 to 7 days a week was the average work week. So people were basically working a farmer's schedule, whether or not they were farmers. In fact, the origins of May Day in 1886, 40 years before Henry Ford started the 40-hour work week, was that all these people had moved from Europe to Chicago with the promise of a better life. And they were working 6 to 7 days a week. They had a worse life rebuilding Chicago after the fire. And they were protesting, wanting a 40-hour work week. And there's this whole story of how there was like a bombing that happened during these protests. And some say it was the police. It's called the Haymarket bombing, if you want to go down that history, historical kind of story. Some people say the police did the bombing. Some people say it was anarchists. Other people say it was communists. Like, there's all this disagreement still over who did the bombing. But there was actually a national shutdown for 2 days that they just, like, everyone had to stay home because they thought this thing was going to erupt. And so it's really interesting that 40 years later, that's when Henry Ford, to the day, decided that that's when he was going to announce the 40-hour work week. And, you know, that's what May Day actually celebrates, is, you know, that time period of, you know, workers' rights and pushing back and saying, you know, we need to have schedules that aren't as crazy as maybe they used to be.
Wow. Your insight into historical information is incredible. I love it.
Thank you.
Those were some excellent questions. And folks, if you have any final little things you want to ask Joe, now is your time. Otherwise, we're coming up on the end here, but we made our way through a bunch of really good ones. And Joe had great answers for everything. Joe, was there anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap?
Yeah, we just have a ton of free resources coming out for clinicians in private practice, and we're here to support and continue to partner with Spruce. In the third week in September, starting September 18th, we're doing Level Up Week, which is a week long. We usually do 15 to 20 webinars all around private practice, every stage from just starting out to mega group practices. So we have details on that over at practiceofthepractice.com, where you can also see all of the webinars we have coming up. We're doing 30-minute micro webinars on very particular topics like how to set your fee, how to name your practice, how to add clinicians to your practice. So very, very clear, quick 30-minute webinars. So if you're short on time, feel free to join us. And then we have a ton of communities and also consultants that can help over at practiceofthepractice.com/apply.
Okay, perfect. We did get one more question. Do you want to
Yeah,
answer that one
let's
real
do
quick?
it.
Okay, Stephanie is wondering, how does she grow a community on social media that includes people in her target niche instead of other therapists who our content may not speak to?
Yeah, in everything you create when you're building things other than, maybe even just your private practice, it's the pain that the person is going through and the transformation that you're offering. So if you're looking at growing a community on social media, say it's around people that have been through some sort of traumatic experience, and you don't want therapists, you want that. So framing out first, is this community for therapists or is it for other people? What is the pain that they come with? And then what's the transformation they'll get through the group? And then looking at what resources you can provide them. So to create a 9-part email course that gives them a PDF handout on addressing your trauma, or, where does trauma come from? Maybe it's psychoeducational, making sure you're noting this isn't a replacement for therapy, and then getting into groups where therapists aren't hanging out. So go into moms groups, go into entrepreneur groups, go on podcasts and get interviewed as a therapist, where you are going to be the expert in that area because they're not interviewing a whole bunch of therapists.
Love it. Love it. This has been incredible. You are an incredible storyteller, Joe. I must say, I imagine your book, which I'm going to have to now read, is equally engaging. So really appreciate your time. We've gotten some great feedback in the Q&A and chat about just how valuable this was. So thank you so much for that. And for the group at large, before we drop, we do these webinars every month. In fact, next month, Joe, if you want to just hit that last slide, we have a webinar on how to proactively shift your practice to prevent burnout. And I know there were some questions about burnout. This particular session applies to not just the mental health space, but other specialties, and kind of digging into how to really deliver that ideal experience to your clients and patients. So I'll include a link to that in the follow-up email that you get with a link to this recording and the slides. Thank you everyone for joining. It looks like everyone stuck with us for the entire hour, which is incredible. That means they were engaged. And Joe, have a terrific rest of your day and summer. This was incredible. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.